Welcome. Today we're going to get into building a robot in Adobe Illustrator. For the robot in Adobe Illustrator, this is based off of a tutorial found online, but we're going to break it down into a video segment so you can fast forward, rewind, and go over things if you have questions or unsure how to do something. Before I do begin, up on the left side here, you'll see that there's shortcut commands that will assist you in moving an object forward or backward. Command or control, command being on a Mac, control being on a PC, plus right bracket will bring an object forward, moving in front of another layer or object. Command or control plus shift and right bracket will bring an object to the front. So if it's all the way behind several objects, you can bring it automatically to the front, save yourself some time. Command or control left bracket sends an object backward, so just sliding an object behind another object if it's on top of that. And then finally, Command or Control Shift left bracket will send an object all the way to the back. Those shortcut keys just provide you a little bit more time and efficiency in building this out. The three main panels that we're going to use today is the Pathfinder. If you do not have the Pathfinder available on your right side navigation, you can go up to Window at the top navigation. In alphabetical order, I'm going to go down to Pathfinder, and I currently already have the Pathfinder located on my left area here. It just provides me a more central layout while not interfering when we need to use the other panels. Over on the right side navigation, we're particularly going to be taking a look at our swatches, getting a number of different colors later on. Our stroke panel, in which we can modify the thickness of the stroke around an object, and then our gradient panel. And I've separated out our gradient panel so I can have this up at the same time as our swatch panel. If the gradient were part of the same setting, they would replace each other and you would not be able to access at the same time. So pulling the gradient off just permits you the ability to have functions at the same time, saving you just, again, more efficiency. So to begin, we're going to get into building out a robot. We're going to start out with a couple basic shapes. And this is a beginner tutorial. So it's just a matter of taking your time, understanding the tools, and understanding how we can compile them into creating out a composition of a robot. We're going to go over to the left side navigation. I currently have my window workspace set up for an Essentials Classic. Just offers more tools over on the left side navigation. And with this Essentials Classic, we're going to click on our rectangle tool. Currently, I have my foreground color just set to white and no stroke, but I'm going to switch this to make sure that we have a black stroke that is easily visible on our screen. Drawing it out, we're going to just click and drag to create out a rectangle for our head. If I want to zoom in and focus on an object, I can always hit Command or Control plus to zoom in. Once I have my square shape, or rectangle shape for the head, I'm going to look to switch over to the ellipse tool. For the ellipse, we're going to start out by drawing out a circle that's going to sit at the top of the head. And actually, we want to place this behind our head. So again, Command or Control left bracket will send the object behind the other object. Now we see the line going through the object. Back over to the rectangle tool, I'm going to look to draw out an antenna. Keeping it relatively thin, we're going to look to adjust this again behind our object. Remember, if you want to hit Command or Control Shift left bracket, we'll send it through multiple objects at the same time. You can always use your arrow keys on your keyboard to also adjust the placement of objects to make sure that it's centered, and we'll also talk about the alignment tool momentarily. Back over to the ellipse, we're going to draw out a circle shape for our antenna. Just at the top of the antenna, we can play with the size and scale. But now that we have our antenna for our robot, now we'll get into the facial features. With the ellipse tool, I'm going to look to draw out some eyes. And with the eye, I can hold down Shift to maintain a perfect circle. And rather than repeating a circle for the outline, I can go up to Object at the top navigation, Path, and Offset Path. With Offset Path, this will allow me to be able to adjust a circle that is relatively a little bit bigger. And I can use either the wheel on my mouse to adjust the size of the object or get into typing in a size that I see will sit around the outside edge of the eye. I'm going to reduce this down to 0.06. just giving a little frame on the outside eye, and click OK. Then I'm going to look to select both the interior and exterior of this eye. I can hold down Shift, click on the outlines of both. Then I can hold down Alt or Option, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac. I'm going to click and drag to create out a second eye over on the right. Now we'll get into drawing out a mouth. A couple different methods that you can look to use. Standard rectangle will work fine. But for myself, I'm going to use a rounded rectangle just to show some variation of shapes. I can click and drag to create out a mouth shape. Again, I can do the object offset path. So object path, offset path. Just give me a little outline, and I'm going to reduce this down a little bit tighter to the face. Now that we have the head, we can always get into manipulating or adding in pieces later, but we're going to use the rounded rectangle tool to draw out a neck area as well. It's going to connect to the torso, main body of our robot. With this object, I'm just going to look to relatively get it centered towards the face. Looking at this, if I do want to make sure that things are aligned. Right now I can tell it's slightly off, but I'm going to click and drag over all the pieces that fall down the center of the face. I'm not going to select out the eyes, because if I do select out the eyes, they're going to compile in the middle as well. But with these objects selected, I can click and drag again over to select out all the objects. I'm going to go to my top navigation where I can see the align preferences, or if you see a line down on the bottom right side, you can go through these options as well. But we're going to be looking for our horizontal distribute center. When I click on this, it will just slightly adjust everything so that make sure that it's perfectly centered inside of the facial features. Now that we have those objects all centered, I'm going to look to duplicate out another piece of neck. So I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag downward to create out that second piece. Then we're going to go over the rectangle tool and look to draw out the torso. I can click and drag to create out a rectangular shape. And everybody's preference to build out their own type of robot, but if you follow along with this, we're building a certain type of robot. Again, if I do feel like things aren't aligning, I could select out the head, the neck, and the torso. And again, try just making sure that things align with our head area. Everything will get aligned together. I'm going to maintain a couple of the elements for consistency purposes. Using the rounded rectangle again, I'm going to look to draw out some joints that connect to our shoulders. Just click and drag. You can always round out the corners as well if you have a rectangle tool. But I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click and drag to create a duplicate over on the other side. What may save you time if you look to just draw out one arm, it will save you time in which we can duplicate and replicate it over to the other side. So if I wanted to get into building out just the right arm first, I'm going to go over to the rectangle tool, click and drag to create out a rectangular shape. And again, with the rectangle tool, I'm going to look to draw out a bar for the arm itself, extending downward. If you want to put in more details or show joints or anything like that, you can absolutely get more creative. But again, I'm going to hit Command or Control left bracket to send the object back behind my shoulder. Next, we want to get into our hand or claw shape. We're going to go over to our ellipse tool. With the ellipse tool, I'm going to draw out a circular shape. I can hold down Shift to maintain a perfect circle. Once we have the circle shape, a couple different methods of creating out a duplicate circle that's going to be smaller on the interior. I can hit Command or Control C, copy, and Control F, or Command F, which pastes the front, putting the object on top. But if I hold down Alt or Option and Shift, I can scale this down to create a smaller circle on the interior. The idea of this is that we're going to create a donut shape. Right now I have two circles, one on top of the other. And just so we can see this a little bit better, I'm going to fill them in with 2 different colors. The idea of this is that we want to cut a hole out in the middle. To do this, we're going to select over both of the shapes, go over to our Pathfinder tool, which we spoke about earlier, and we're going to click on minus front. When I click on minus front, it will cut out the middle object because that's on top of the red one, and it will also get rid of the red portion of that circle. Click on it, we see that it's now hollow. Now we want to repeat the same idea by going over to our rectangle tool and drawing out a perfect square. I can click and drag holding shift. I'm going to look to rotate this, so to get a perfect 45-degree rotation, I can hold down shift. I'm going to look to place the top point into the middle of our circle shape. If you do not see your smart guides on, a good way of being able to make sure things align is going up to view at the top navigation and checking on your smart guides. With this, you get these little pink lines to appear. Make sure that we have things centered correctly. But with this diamond shape that we currently have, again, we're looking to cut out anything that the diamond is touching. So clicking on the minus front crops it out and allows us to have our claw shape for our robot. I'm going to put it back to white just for now. We can always add in details later. But I'm going to look to select over the arm as well as the little shoulder joint, selecting all the pieces. I'm going to hit Command C for making a copy and Command F, pasting a copy to the front. Then we're going to look to rotate or reflect this object. To reflect the object, I can go up to Object at the top navigation, Transform, and Reflect. With our panel, we do want to be making sure that we're seeing the vertical reflection, so that we're going to have the joint on the inside left. I can click OK. I'm going to slide this over to the other side of the arm. Again, these pink lines, the smart guides, allow us to make sure that things stay centered and stay aligned. So now that we have the arms for our robot, we're going to get into building and extending out our torso. We're going to switch over to the polygon tool, and to draw out with the polygon tool, we're going to start by going to the bottom left corner of the object. As I click and drag this object, we see that this is a hexagon shape, but I want a pentagon shape. To change the number of sides, don't let go with the mouse, but I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to change the number of sides. We can go all the way down to a triangle. You can go all the way up to have what looks like a perfect circle, adding in anchor point, as long as you're holding up the arrow key. But we're going to reduce this down to a pentagon shape, 5 sides. And if I want to make sure that I get the flat bottom, I can hold down shift to lock that into place. It's okay if things aren't aligned right now. We can always adjust momentarily, but make sure that you let go of the mouse before you let go of shift. With the move tool, I'm going to click and drag the pentagon so that the left point is going to touch the left side of our robot. I grab the right to scale this up. And though the line got a little bit thicker, we'll talk about adjusting the weight and stroke of the objects. We're looking to make sure that we can get the points of our pentagon to line up to the bottom points of our rectangle. When it comes into modifying out the stroke, I want to maintain consistency. I'm going to select on the rectangle shape of the body, hold down shift and click on the pentagon. And this time with the Pathfinder, we're going to click on the first option, Unite. This will combine the shapes into one single shape. So this gives us a bottom portion for the body of our robot. Now we want to get into adding some details. We can repeat some objects that we did earlier with like the eyes. I'm going to go back over to the rectangle tool first to give us the computer or the robot a screen. You can always add in details as much as you want. So if I did want to do the object path, offset path, I give myself a little border. I'm going to look to put in a couple buttons. I can use the arrow keys to adjust as needed. Once I go through duplicating or creating out the circle, I can go path, offset path. Again, adjust to your preference of what you feel the settings would be best at. And you can always thin out the stroke as well to create some variation between the objects. To select out the circles of this button and make a duplicate, I'm going to click and drag from an open space, that means outside the body of the robot, over top of the two circles. Again, you see that it accidentally selects the torso, so I'm going to hold down Shift and click on the torso to get rid of that. Now that I have these circles, I'm going to look to create a duplicate. So again, I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag downward, and I can hold Shift to maintain alignment so that things are consistent throughout. Also look to put in a couple smaller buttons as well below the screen. If you want to get creative, you can try imagining what the screen could be used for, whether it's a computer screen, whether it could be a microwave. Try to be as creative as possible. I can look at the alignment. If I want to adjust, I can see how objects align, but I can select on all three and make sure that I have consistency by clicking on, again, the horizontal distribute center, just making sure everything aligns to where I want. The next portion is drawing out a venting system for the bottom torso of our robot. I'm going to go over to our pen tool. With the pen tool, I'm going to start where it starts to go on a diagonal. I'm going to click a point, move down, maintaining parallel to the left diagonal that we have here, and click a point. I can hit escape to end the line. With this line, we're going to create a duplicate, Command or Control C, Command or Control F, and then we're going to look to reflect this object. Again, Object Transform and Reflect. And again, we want to do the vertical reflection. And click OK. Click and drag this object over to the side. And then we're going to hold down Shift to select on both of these two lines. To create out a venting system, we're going to create a blend by clicking on each of these using the blend tool. Over on the left side navigation, mine is currently the fourth object from the left column of our icons. We can see a little sample of what the blend tool does. Combining an object, when you click on each, it combines into one object or as many as you prefer. So with the blend tool, I want to make sure I get that little white square to click exactly on the line. And then I'm going to do this for the other line, making sure that the white square is what's clicking on that line. When I click on it, we get three different lines in the middle, perfectly aligned to the two on the outside. If I want to adjust this in any way, I'm going to double click on the blend tool on the left side navigation, and it will bring up our blending options. I want to have specified steps. Smooth color can work, but if you wanted to create more of a venting system, I'm going to change the specified steps and change 3 to 15. With 15, if I check and uncheck preview and recheck preview, we see that we get now more lines consistently blended between the objects. I can click OK. Now we have our venting system. Now we want to get into building out the bottom legs. Again, we're going to go over to the rectangle tool, click and drag to create out a rectangle for our one leg. And again, we can send this to the back, Command Shift left bracket behind the rest of our objects. I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag so we get the left leg as well. Now we want to get into building out the feet. To do this, we're going to go over to our polygon tool again. This time we're going to do a heptagon shape, 7 sides. So don't let go of Shift, or don't let go of the mouse. I'm going to hit the up arrow so I get 7 sides. If I hold down Shift, I can make sure I get the flat bottom. But with this heptagon shape, we're going to look to draw out a rectangle on the bottom area. And we're going to click and drag across the bottom edge so we have a flat piece that will have the 5 points on top, or the 4 points on top. We're going to click and drag over both the shapes, and we can see that this rectangle is sitting over the top, or the bottom portion of this heptagon. We're going to click on the minus front again, and it'll cut off the bottom portion, leaving us with this flat foot. Rather than doing it twice, we can just hold down Alt or Option, click and drag this over to our other foot as well. So if I zoom out, now we have the basics for our robot. Now we want to get in the process adding in details, adding in color, and seeing how we can make this robot a little bit more interesting. First, we want to get into outlining our robot. To outline our robot, to give it some thickness around the outside edge, we're going to use our selection tool, the black arrow, click and drag from an open space over top of the entire object. It selects out all the pieces of our robot, and with everything selected, we're going to hit Command or Control C, which is copy, Command or Control F, which is paste to front. With the paste to front, you don't realize it does automatically make a copy directly on top of the object. If I wanted to test it out, you can see that I can click and drag it over to the left, but I'm going to hit Command or Control Z to undo. I still have the copy sitting directly on top, but what we're going to do is go over to our Pathfinder. With our Pathfinder tool, I'm going to click on Unite, combining them into one solid shape. Now that I have this shape all combined into one, we're going to go over to our stroke panel. Over on the right side navigation where we see the 3 different variations size of lines, we're going to up the weight of our stroke to 8 to 10 points. The reason why we're doing 8 to 10 is the interior is going to actually extend behind our original robot that we still have a copy sitting underneath of. So if I hit Command Shift left bracket, it sends the object to the back. It'll give us that thickness on the outside while not affecting the interior. Again, if you don't like the weight or if it's too heavy, I can always reduce the weight while it's still selected, just to give us some variation between the objects. So there we have our outline for our robot. Now we can get into our coloring. For the coloring, there's many different ways of attacking the coloring for our object. We can do basic flat colors, but for my classes, I'd like to make sure that students are learning how to do gradients. We can also look to put in some details that are going to make this a little bit more interesting or dynamic. So if I wanted to think about how to make this a little bit more engaging, I might consider adding in teeth or some breaks inside of the mouth. I'm going to use the pen tool to draw out one line. I can hold down Alt or Option, click and drag to create a duplicate. I'm going to bring to the other side. With both lines, again, we're going to do the blend tool. With the blend tool, this did a smooth blend showing multiple lines inside of this area. But I'm going to go back into my blend options, double clicking on the blend icon, change smooth color to specified steps, and I'm going to change this to 6. Again, just uncheck preview and recheck preview. You can see if you like it, if it needs to be modified. Reduce it down to 5 just to give us a little bit more space, and that works for me. But the reason why we did all shapes is it's going to be a lot easier to color than trying to draw out lines. So if I start out with a couple basic shapes, I can just use a square as a sample of how we can build out our gradients. For the first gradient, we have white. We can always modify this, and I can use my swatches panel. I'm going to pick out a light or medium gray. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click and drag to create a couple duplicate boxes so we can do some other colors. Instead of grays, we'll do the standard red, yellow, and blue. But again, feel free to be a little bit more creative or try different colors as well. So rather than doing flat colors, we're going to see how we can modify and create out gradients. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so we can focus on this area. Command or Control plus sign allows me to zoom in, and we're going to select on the right side. Currently, we have this gray color as our foreground color. Over in the layers panel, you can see the gray is on top. We have the black stroke. But we're going to take a look at our gradient panel now. And I have my swatches located right above my gradient. Again, you can click and drag your gradient off of the panel if needed. I'm just going to click and drag it off to the side, just so we can access this and be able to see our swatches and gradient at the same time. But with this object selected, we're currently seeing gray in the foreground, black on the back on the stroke. And if I take a look at my gradient, I also see the same gray fill and the black stroke. What I'm going to do is click and drag this gray right into the middle of my gradient bar with the object selected, and we see that the gradient applies right onto the object. Having a white to gray gradient is great and it works well, but if I want to modify this in any way or change and customize this in any ways, we can look to modify our gradient right on the gradient panel. If I move my cursor along this gradient slider, I'm going to move my cursor right in between the white and the gray, and if I click, it adds another color. So it's picking out directly above what the color would be. So if I do this on the other side, I get a darker gray, adding into this area. If you don't want a color, if I want to think that black is too much, I can click on the black and either click and drag it down to make it go away, or I can select it and hit the trash can icon. This way we can get into modifying or creating out a more customized variation of gray tones. If I don't want a true white, again, I can always take the white off, click on it, hit the trash can, or click and drag it downward to get rid of it. So right now we currently have a light gray, a medium gray, and a darker gray. But if you wanted to add some tones, you could consider adding in some variations. Again, I can click inside between colors, and I can actually rearrange them so I could have highlights on certain areas, seeing a lighter tone and give me more metallic look. If I want to change a color that's presented on our gradient slider, I can double click on it. Currently I'm working in CMYK, but if you want to adjust, you can always go to the top right to adjust into RGB or grayscale. This works out well where I can drop my K, the black, to create out a highlight or shine in a certain area, give me a more metallic look. If I want to adjust on another color, make it darker, change it up, we can see how it's going to apply onto that object because it's still selected. So this gives us a nice metallic look. If you want more of a traditional type of gradient of one color, I'm going to select on my red, click and drag the red down to my gradient bar. I'm going to look to get rid of these gray colors. But you always need two colors on your gradient bar. What I'm going to do is click to the left side of this red, adding in another red. Now that I have two reds, I can get rid of this gray. I'm going to slide one red to the right and one to the left. And I'm going to click on the right one to darken this up. I'm going to double click on that circle and bring the K up to give me a darker shade. Now if I take a look at my sample, I see a standard red into a dark red. And you can always adjust to your preference, or again, you could always get into more complicated type of gradient with some different values. But we're going to repeat the same process for the yellow and the blue. Click on the object. I'm going to pull the yellow down, adding in another color stop. I'm going to slide each of them to the each side. To get a darker yellow, I'm just going to look to bring up the M, the magenta, giving us a yellow into yellow orange. And again, just feel free to experiment, to explore, see how the colors are going to change for you. If I want to do a lighter yellow, I could drop down the Y so I get a more tint of that yellow, a little bit softer, and I can balance it out. Finally, with our blue, the same idea. Click and drag our blue down and modify out the colors that are provided for us so that we can create a lighter variation and a darker shade from that blue. So now that I have these three gradient colors created out, I can look to place individual colors into our robot. So if I start out with the antenna at the top, to match a color, I'm going to select on the antenna that I want, use the eyedropper tool, and I can sample directly from one of these squares, and we see it placed inside the area. Because I do have a rounded object, I may want to consider changing the gradient from a linear gradient to a radial gradient. To do this, we're going to go over to our gradient panel on the right. Right at the top navigation, we can see type, we have currently linear gradient. And if I click on radial gradient, we see that it goes from light red in the middle to dark red on the outsides. We can also use our left gradient to adjust the placement of our radial gradient. So if I see right now the red in the middle and dark red on the outside, I could always adjust the placement so that the highlight becomes on the top and the shadow more casting on the bottom. Or if I wanted to expand it out, I can modify on these circles on the outside of our gradient tool on the left. So if I want a little bit stronger red on the top, I can do that, while it still gives me that darker shadow on the bottom. If you want to select out multiple pieces, you can look to color out multiple pieces at the same time. I'm going to select on the face, hold shift, click on the torso and shoulders, as well as I will get into selecting out the legs and arms. With all those objects selected, I'm going to use the eyedropper tool and match the metallic gradient I created. I click on it and we see that gradient apply onto the objects. I really do like it on the legs because it's creating that cylindrical effect, but we can also customize and modify the gradient on other shapes if it doesn't work. So if I see this little ball on the top of his head, I can try a radial gradient, see how that applies. If I don't like it, again, we can always customize it, maybe remove some colors so it's a little bit smoother. And again, I'm going to change the placement, just adjusting so that it's brighter on the top. And it creates out more of a circular highlight. If I want to select on the shoulders, I can always adjust the gradient rather than traveling from left to right. If I click on the gradient tool on the left side, we can see that it's traveling from left to right on the shoulders. But if I click and drag from top to bottom, it can change the direction of the gradient. So it's something a little bit different and not always the same repeated over and over again. Now that we have a metallic look, I can try the hands and feet. I can hold shift to select out the multiple pieces and use the eyedropper tool to match to a color. Again, we can adjust to the gradient as needed, and I'll have the gradient travel from top to bottom. I'm doing the feet and legs separate, or feet and hands separately because they are different heights. It would not transfer correctly. It would just be a dark shadow on the feet if I didn't do them individually. So we have a couple of buttons that we can consider trying out. Again, just use the eyedropper tool with the object selected, and we can see how it applies. If you want to adjust in the gradient panel, I can always change the gradient as well, clicking on the drop down on the right side so that the gradient travels in a different method. I'll go to -90, so the highlights on the bottom. And again, the red. Just create some variation inside. So just take your time, experiment, see what colors and creations that you create. Again, you don't have to stick to these color schemes, but see what else you can do. I can always expand out over certain areas if I don't like it. We also have the ability to use a couple default gradients or gradients that the computer provides. If I wanted to add in other gradients, I can go over to my swatches panel. On the top right side of the swatches panel, I'm going to click on the 3 lines and go down to Open Swatch Library, and then go to Gradients. And under Gradients, we can see a couple different options. Currently, you can't see it off my screen, but I'm going to click on Metals. With metals, it offers us gold, silvers, blue steel, copper, brass, many different gradients that are already created for us. So it saves us some time and effort. So any type of gradient that you want to use, you could consider attempting, seeing what they look like, how they're going to apply, but figure out what's best for you. And I'm choosing the darker variation of the offsets, or for the offsets, so that I'm creating a frame. And you're going to want to do the gradients probably one at a time, especially on their different levels, so you can see how the highlight's going to affect the design. Again, if I do want to change up a color, I can always create out a different gradient. For myself, I want to try a green color, so I can always replace this out with lighter green colors. Just creating some variation so it's not all the same. If I do want to do any type of customization, I can consider doing something different. I could use the pen tool, maybe do like a heartbeat type of design on the inside. Or put in messages. You can always use the type tool to draw something out. We're going to eliminate out the fill and just modify the stroke. The stroke, I'll just make it a yellow just so I can see it, make it stand out a little bit. And I can always adjust the thickness as needed, so it's more visible. So we have a lot of gradients now applied into the object. Everything stands out a lot more dimensionally. Now we want to get into the little details that are going to really push this over the edge and make it stand out. So we're going to look to get in some highlights. To create out some highlights, I'm going to start out by looking at our top of our antenna. I can zoom in towards the top area. I'm going to select on the red circle, and I'm going to make a copy, Command C, Command F. And I'm going to change this foreground color to white and black. Just clicking on the default option, we see the default fill and stroke on the bottom left next to the fill and stroke. Then we're going to go over to the ellipse tool and draw out an ellipse that's going to cover the bottom portion of this shape. I could always make it more narrow and adjust the placement. I'm just going to use the arrow key to slide it over. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and select out both of the two white circles. And with our Pathfinder, we're going to click on minus front. It's going to cut off the bottom portion of the circle, leaving us this white object right now with a black stroke, but we're going to take the black stroke out. And we're going to drop the opacity of this white fill. To modify the white fill, I go to the top navigation where it says 100%, or go over the right side navigation where it says 100%, and we're going to change this to 25 to 30%. I can hit enter, and I'm going to scale this down just slightly so it appears on the interior of my antenna, leaving me a little bit of trim of red around the outside. Just make sure to hold Shift so you can scale proportionally. So it just gives us a little bit of highlight. Again, if it's too bright, you can always reduce it down. Again, 25% or so. But rather than redoing this several times, I can take this one, Command or Control C, Command V, and I'm going to look to place this over top of my eyes as well. I can scale it up so it fills over the top portion of my eye. And you can do this for all the circular shapes that you have. You can hold down Alt, click and drag over to the right side. Again, if it's not bright enough because I'm dealing with yellow, I could put the opacity higher. 35 for the eyes, just so they're a little bit more visible. Take this, bring it down for my buttons on the chest. Hold Alt, click and drag, bring it to that area. I'm just continuing to make copies. Command C, Command V. Then again, I can scale these down as needed to create out the button highlight. Now that I have one, hold down Alt or Option, click and drag over to the left. Do this again one more time for our yellow, or whatever color combinations you decided to use. You can see as I zoom out, it's just a lot more punch of dimension, so it's not so flat. When it comes into other aspects, you don't want to do it just on circular shapes, but you can look to add in highlights on other features like the shoulders or on the head. To do this, what I'm going to look to do is zoom in on the shoulder first so we can see this process. It's going to be similar to the way that we drew out our highlight on the antenna, but we're going to use our intersect rather than our minus front. So I'm going to select on the shoulder, hit Control or Command C, Command F, and change the foreground color to white and black. Again, going over to the ellipse tool. With the ellipse tool, I'm going to draw a circle over the top half of my shoulder. Doesn't have to be exactly perfectly even. I'm going to hold Shift to select out both pieces. So again, instead of using the minus front, we're going to use intersect, leaving us the middle piece that's overlapping. Again, we're going to eliminate out the black stroke, and I can scale this down slightly just to give us the highlight around the top edge. Again, dropping the opacity to give us a subtle highlight over the shoulder area. I can make a copy, Command C. We'll zoom in over to the head, Command V to bring it in. I'm going to align it up to the top left of the head, and then I can scale it out to fit across the head area. If I do want to adjust it in any way, I can always just grab a side to adjust the location. But what I do want to do is sit it behind my eyes. So to sit it behind my eyes, I'm going to hit Command or Control left bracket. And I would have to continue to tap this or hold down the left bracket until it eventually moves behind the eyes. If this is too long, you can always try Command Shift left bracket. Understand that this moves it behind everything. And then I would have to now do Command or Control right bracket to bring it forward. I just want that highlight to be appearing behind the eyes. So if I zoom out, get the highlight there. We can always reduce it if it's too much. but I'm also going to look to place this on my screen where the heart monitor rhythm is. I can scale it up or down, making it bigger or smaller. If I want to do it on other pieces, I can do it on my other shoulder. Take my shoulder, alter option, slide over to there. And again, just adding a more metallic type of highlight across those pieces. I'll also do for the chest if I want. I'm going to make sure to move this behind the other pieces. Command Shift left bracket, and then I can tap it forward. Command right bracket to bring it up. But still appearing behind my buttons. It's not interfering with the design itself. And again, if I need to zoom in, don't be afraid to zoom in, get closer to it. So we have our highlights, we have our gradients. The last step is adding in a drop shadow at the bottom of our robot. To create out the shadow to make it look like he's standing on the ground, we're going to go over to our ellipse tool. With our ellipse tool, we're going to draw out a perfect circle, hold down Shift. Currently I have a white fill. If you started out with a white fill black stroke, we eventually are going to eliminate out the black stroke. We can click on the black stroke over on the left side and hit none, or go to the top navigation, change the black to none. But in our settings, to make it convenient, we can use some default gradients that are provided for us. With the object selected, we want to make sure that we have our fill color on top of our stroke. Make sure the stroke corner is not appearing over top of our fill. But with our fill on top of our stroke, we're going to take a look at the default options that are provided for us in our gradient panel. If I click on the drop down, I scroll up or down, I can see what is offered for us. They do offer us a super soft black vignette. With this, we can customize it. The idea is that we're going to have a circle that fades out into transparency. So we're going to click on the super soft black vignette. And yes, it does create the transparency, but we want the black on the interior. So with the object still selected, we're going to click on our reverse gradient right on the gradient panel underneath the fill and the stroke. Reverse gradient so that the black appears on the middle. But then we're going to expand this gradient so it reaches out to the outer edge. Slide it so it's evenly displaced. So we're getting the strong black in the middle. Now that we have this, we're going to grab the top middle, pull down so that we're squeezing the shape down. We're going to look to place it underneath or by the feet, and then eventually move this behind our feet. Command or Control Shift left bracket behind the feet of our object. If it's coming out too strong or if it's too bold, we can always drop the opacity at the top navigation, make it more of a gray color, just softening it up. But now we look at it, we have gradients, we have this metallic look happening, the shines, as well as the drop shadow, and we have completed out our robot. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Good luck and have some fun.